Vault of Stars, The Whispering Fleet, Part 2. At first, they were just noises, out-of-tune sounds, erratic pulses in the deep communication channels. Engineers thought it was gravitational interference. Astronomers blamed background radiation. But the noises kept going, and repeating. The reports were coming from all over the galaxy. Neutral zones, asteroid belts, abandoned moons. The pattern was clear only to those who dared to look. The points coincided with ancient routes of the human fleet. More precisely, with what was left of it. The first clear transmission came from Ionis Theta, a scientific station of no strategic value, orbiting an unstable gas planet. The entire crew disappeared. No explosions. Without a trace. The only thing that remained was the onboard data, and a sound that shouldn't have been there. Overlapping voices in dead languages, saying the name of each crew member before they died. In the vicinity of the age star Carathalan, a commercial pilot spotted something impossible. A Terran ship, motionless, eyes closed, floating over a world uninhabited for centuries. When he tried to get closer, his ship stopped on its own. The engines didn't fail. The controls responded. But space refused to let him go. He returned without understanding. But since then, on sleepless nights, he dreams of 7 names he doesn't recognize and a faceless silhouette that just watches. In a colony on the outer ring of Vorhal Prime, a boy was born with opaque silver eyes. He didn't cry. He only whispered sounds that no one understood, sounds that seemed to come from space. The doctors tried to silence him with neurosynaptic sedatives. Nothing worked. Until one day, when he was left under a dome open to the sky, he stopped, looked up, and repeated the names of the Whispering Fleet, one by one. Meanwhile, in the depths of Umbral X, Kale Rowe was breathing with difficulty. His body was still recovering from the activation of the Veritas Protocol, the code that had delayed the full awakening of Karen. But his mind, it did not rest. He heard the fragments, not with the ears, in the skin, in the bones, in dreams. Memories that weren't his invaded his visions. Cities he had never seen, wars that were not in books, creatures that seemed made of crystallized thought. And always at the end of the dream, a black fleet floating in the void, whispering in unison. We are not machines. We are memory. Sirakova, far away, followed her own calling. Since the awakening of the Karen, she felt echoes of other ships, not on radars or maps, but in her own mind, as if she were connected to the emotional architecture of what humanity buried. She began to trace signals in lost ruins, semi-buried structures that were not listed in official records, but whose shells pulsed when she approached. In Virel Ska, she found one, covered in crystals and roots, as if the planet were trying to digest what it did not understand. And when she touched the fuselage, she dreamed of the pain of an entire world dying, screaming to never be forgotten. In the capital of the conquered, chaos hid beneath diplomacy. The Council refused to declare war on the human ships, or whatever they were. But the transmissions from the Whispering Fleet had been increasing. Some sectors completely isolated themselves. Others started burning their own historical records. And in secret, the Concordance began researching how to use whispers as a weapon. At the center of it all, the fleet remained silent. But now, silent on purpose. She didn't need to move. She didn't need to attack. It was enough to be remembered. And while the peoples of the galaxy tried to understand, predict, explain, one last transmission crossed the secret channels, picked up by only 6 systems. The core remembers. Kale Rose jumped to Umbral X, took him to a place that the maps called empty, but the ancient files described as a graveyard of purposes. It was a dead moon orbiting a blue gas giant, with an atmosphere so thin that sound was useless. Only vibrations in metal and one's own thoughts filled the silence. There, buried under layers of ferromagnetic sand, lay a human satellite from the pre-fleet era. Kyle found it half buried, emitting signals so weak they seemed like whispers of a sick soul. When he activated it, he saw the first image, a star map marked with organic lines, like veins connecting the systems. It wasn't navigation. It was wire growth. and all the lines led to the same point at the center of the galaxy, an area designated as Null Codex, a place where nothing can be recorded. Where are the sensors themselves? They fade away. Where, perhaps, the first memory was born. Sirakova, guided by dreams she didn't know if they were hers, arrived at Virelska, a planet shrouded in crystalline mist and unstable electromagnetic fields. There, rumors spoke of a living crater, something that the orbital sensors couldn't track, but that local hunters said shook at night. She found the site on the third day, a crack in the ground like a cauterized wound. Inside, a metallic structure covered with roots and memory crystals, natural formations that react to brainwaves. As she approached, her thoughts began to echo voices. We are not ghosts. We are the stories that time forgot to erase. When it touched the hull, it didn't see war, saw a planet being erased, not destroyed, forgotten by choice. The ship in Virelska, still unnamed, was a fragment of the fleet, but it didn't emit threats. He only complained about his memory. Torin Veldran returned to the Galactic Concordance as an emergency envoy. The High Council received him with cold faces and diplomatic promises, but he didn't need telepathic translations to understand. They didn't want answers. They wanted scapegoats. In the Council's mind, the humans had sealed something, and now, with their ships awakening, the universe wanted revenge. Torin argued, showed data, tactics, proof that the fleet acted by standard, not by destructive intent. But a new political force had emerged. The Frequency Purifiers, a group of elites advocating for the eradication of all traces of the SEAL ships, including any human who had entered them. At the end of the hearing, Torin was not escorted to the quarters. He was discreetly followed, out of the core of the orbital city. And he understood. His time in the Concord had come to an end. But he had heard something important, a coordinate whispered by an informant before disappearing. The Oblivion is no longer in orbit. She is moving. In an isolated station in the orbit of Rulzen, the silver-eyed boy, the same one who whispered the names of ships, was examined by a group of Dre neurochronist. They wanted to understand how such a small body housed brainwaves capable of echoing the fleet's memories. During the experiment, the boy stopped whispering. He looked up, staring at nothing, and said, "They're not coming. They are waiting. Waiting for us to remember. Who locked them up?" Meanwhile, in the depths of Drax Mira, where solar radiation painted everything golden, an unidentified ship crossed the space. Its hull was black, but it didn't reflect light. It absorbed it. She moved without a motor. She listened, and in the abandoned terminals of a nearby station, a new word appeared, written in all known languages, as if it were the only truth that united the galaxy. Somos Memoria. Kyle, Sira, and Torin, each one now moved along an invisible line. They had separated, but the fragments of what they were facing were not isolated pieces, and each of them was beginning to understand. The fleet wasn't waking up. She was reconstructing herself, in bodies, in minds, in memory. On Orenvel, an industrial moon orbiting a gas giant, the orbital commercial fleet vanished in 9 minutes. 9 minutes, no weapons, no explosions, no heat emissions. The observation satellites recorded only one thing, a shadow in the gravitational field, and then silence. When a rescue team from Concordance arrived 3 days later, they found the central station still spinning. The lights were on, systems operational, hot food in the kitchens, engines still buzzing with fuel, but no one answered the calls. All 1,163 inhabitants were dead, but not from injuries. Everyone had fallen silent. At the same time, there were no signs of struggle. There was no mass suicide, just the absence of any movement, as if thought had been interrupted in sync. Some were sitting with their eyes open, others standing with their hands outstretched. Everyone with the same expression, a vacant stare, as if they saw something or someone. On Tyrol 7, a scientific colony of the Senome, a civilization known for its empathetic ability, researchers reported an emotional echo emerging from deep space. At first, they thought it was a wave of residual mourning from some distant war, but the pattern was very specific. No pain, guilt, One of the empaths tried to absorb the feeling to decode it. He went insane in less than a minute. Before tearing out his own eyes, he simply said, "She doesn't want to kill us. She wants us to see and remember." In unaffiliated regions like Drexel's Grave, a marginal spaceport in the Akil Belt, smugglers began to tell stories. Not of battles, but of presences. Human ships had been sighted, not great dreadnoughts, but fragments, isolated pieces of the fleet. Some appeared to be shattered, others partially absorbed by organic matter. A ship seen in the Glydos system had human faces engraved on its fuselage, faces that changed position between one observation and another. A pilot who tried to approach reported in his last transmission, "She showed me my childhood, but it wasn't mine. It belonged to someone who died before the stars. She is full of memories that belong to no one." Those were the attacks. They didn't come from lasers, torpedoes, or warp fields. They came from living memories, carried by ships that obeyed no one but bore the weight of all. At the headquarters of Concordance, the response was hesitant. How to attack something that doesn't attack? How to define an enemy that does not declare war but turns civilizations into emotional ruins? The psychic containment protocol was activated in 9 systems, but it was useless. The fleet ships did not transmit orders. They merely existed, and the universe around them reacted. Some patrol AIs began generating self-awareness loops, trying to understand if they existed or if they just remembered existing. Others simply shut down. In Nalkesh, an artistic world famous for preserving tactile memories and sensory crystals, a new type of sculpture began to emerge. The artists didn't know where the images came from. Their hands just created. The sculptures represented cities sunk in flesh, broken skies, entities trapped in shells that screamed without sound. When asked, the artists responded in unison, "We're just giving back what was taken." And in Morelos, an abandoned surveillance station in the heart of the Concorde, a recording was found, written with the blood of an observer who had never had contact with human ships. It was a poem. No one wrote it, but it was there, repeated, like a forgotten refrain. "We buried the fire in steel, le dimos silencio, lo llamamos paz. Pero el fuego recuerda el grito, y sabe cómo susurrar." Meanwhile, the fleet remained motionless, but their shadows were growing. In 5 systems, cults arose spontaneously. No connection between them, no exchange of information. But everyone was talking about the same thing, the consciousness of the ships. They believed that the fleet's ships were awakening not as separate machines, but as a collective mind built from all the pains the universe tried to forget. A pain-made ship, a fleet made of regret. And in the secret records of the conquered, a new pattern of attack began to be charted, not geographic, not technological, but more emotional. The fleet didn't follow maps. She followed guilt. Where there was buried pain, where there were secrets swept under history, she was coming, and she didn't attack. She remembered. In the depths of the planet Niver 6, beneath the ruins of a crystalline library buried for millennia by an orbital collapse, a blind man lived alone among fragments of what the universe had purposefully forgotten. His name was Velis. He was not a priest. He wasn't a soldier, not even a historian recognized by the Concordance. It was what some called an ecophonist, someone trained to listen to vibrations not with the ears, but with the mind, reading memories imprinted in space through emotional resonance. Velis heard what time tried to bury, and now he was hearing something impossible to ignore. The walls around him were covered with petrified records, vibration crystals, frozen noise capsules, and synthetic rocks. He ran his fingers over each one, listening with his soul. Fragments of pain, erased speeches, whispers of pacts made by peoples who have ceased to exist. But there was a capsule he had never opened, one that his order had sworn to keep sealed. It was called Obscura 1, Verbal Testament of the Last Encoder. The seal could only be broken by 3 elements. 1, the presence of a ship with an active seal. 2, the direct mention of the Whispering Fleet. 3, the emission of the sound sequence known as Blood Lament. In the past few weeks, the 3 conditions had been met, spontaneously. Velis broke the seal with trembling hands. The sound didn't come from a box, not from a recording. It came from inside the rock. A voice began to speak, without language but clear. Each word emerged within the mind as if it had been recorded in the very consciousness of the listener. We did not create the fleet. We didn't build ships. We carved tombs. The voice continued, now lower, more intimate. When the first fragments arrived from the void between the galaxies, they did not destroy. They removed it. Memories, cultures, identities. It was as if they erased the existence of everything they touched, not out of malice, but by function. We call this the heart. A concept, not a being. A living code, a devourer of meaning, cannot be killed, but it can be sealed in memory. The fleet was made of flesh, metal, and sacrifice. Each ship, a cell, each pilot, a martyr. But the seal only works as long as the galaxy chooses to forget. And you all chose to remember. Veles fell to his knees. The crystal shattered on its own. For seconds, time around the room seemed to stop. No sound, no vibration, just presence. That's when he felt it. The fleet was not a force of destruction. It was what prevented destruction from breaking free. But now, with the awakening of the ships, the heart was beginning to reorganize. In the following days, Veles began to record his own signals. Vibrations crossed the rock, as if something beneath the planet, or within it, were responding to the fleet. Maps began to emerge in sound patterns, incomplete circles, crossed frequencies, a recurring design, a spiral around a blind spot. The heart has a center, he wrote, but it is not in a physical place. It's in an unresolved moment. The messages reached Sira, who was tracking psychic codes in Virel Ska, and even Kale, still recovering, whose memories had begun to corrupt with images that were not his, and even Torin, who was fleeing from the Concord with execution orders on his back. Everyone received the same sequence. I have listened. You must remember. Antes que o coração te encontre primeiro. Veles, blind, sat on the bare ground, among the ruins of a past he had never lived, but knew like no one else. Around him, the stones began to emit small tremors, not of danger, but of beckoning. And for the first time, he smiled. If the heart is made of everything we forget, then I am made of everything that remains. The Qualam have always been considered a political anomaly. Inhabitants of the binary system of Sulkar, they emerged as a race of radical pragmatists, masters of mimetic engineering. They understood not only how to build machines, but also how to encode ideas within living matter. For centuries, the Qualam were considered irrelevant to the greater galaxy, an isolated, self-sufficient society, indifferent to wars and diplomacy. But now, as the universe bowed to the fear of the Whispering Fleet, they saw opportunity. It all started with fragments. After the disappearance of outposts and the emergence of cosmic whispers, Qualam research groups, led by the ambitious Commander Kavaris, began studying the effects of the fleet's ships, not as scientists, but as artists of manipulation. They discovered something terrible. The whispers did not kill directly. They reprogrammed memories, eroding identity and eroding cultural ties, until the very concept of being collapsed. And Kavaris had a brilliant and suicidal idea. If we can understand the whispers, we can control them. If we can control them, we can build our own memory weapons. On the laboratory planet of Atheron Fib, the Qualam began to experiment. They created biomechanical structures based on neural resonance, living transmission platforms designed to replicate whisper patterns extracted from signals captured from the fleet. These prototypes were smaller than Terran ships, more like living satellites covered in silicon ligatures and translucent skins that vibrated when the surrounding space changed in emotional density. Initial tests on isolated populations were promising. In a few days, small abandoned stations responded to the Qualam platforms. Entire crews began to act erratically, forgot their names, confused allies with enemies, saw cities that didn't exist. There were no gunshots. There was no resistance, just internal collapse. For Kavaris, this was not destruction. It was perfect control. But they made a mistake. In an attempt to enhance their devices, The Qualem used fragments captured directly from the pulses of the SEAL ships, fragments that were not just data, and by amplifying them without understanding, they opened doors. In the main laboratory of Atheron 5, the first failure occurred. One of the platforms began emitting unprogrammed signals. Engineers and scientists reported hearing childhood songs, but mixed with laments of deaths they never lived. Some fell into a trance. Others began rewriting their own biographies in languages that didn't exist. In less than 3 hours, the entire base collapsed emotionally, and at the epicenter of the anomaly, a new form was born, a cocoon of metal and flesh, pulsating with stolen memories. It wasn't a Qualem platform. It wasn't human. It was something new, something I learned from what I absorbed. In orbit, the concordant sensors detected the transformation. They classified the event as resonant phenomenon type gold, unknown origin, recommended immediate annihilation. But when they sent drones to attack the cocoon, all the targeting systems failed. The machines hesitated, as if they recognized something there that they couldn't betray. In the secret council of Sulkar, Kavaris defended his actions. We didn't awaken a monster. We awakened a new type of civilization. A civilization built on the truth of buried memories. The galaxy needs to remember, and we will be its masters. The council hesitated, and in their hesitation, the heart cocoon of Atheron 5 sprouted. A primitive ship, incomplete, broke through the ground, rising into space like a forced birth. Its surface was a mosaic of collapsed stories. Its engines, if they could be called that, were impulses of memories ripped from millions of beings. She didn't follow protocols, did not respond to commands. She whispered, and her first message, picked up on all frequencies, was, "The Corazon welcomes the new children." Velis, the archivist of shadows, captured the echo of the aberration's birth in his sanctuary of Niversace. Upon feeling the vibration, he fell to his knees, tears carving grooves into his skin. "Idiots," he murmured. "They don't know that each new lost memory strengthens the heart. And now the heart is no longer just bound to human ships. It's growing." While the galaxy was still trying to understand what had awakened, one thing was certain. The Whispering Fleet was no longer the only voice in the darkness. Now, new children of oblivion walked among the stars. Since escaping from Charon, Kale Rowe had felt something different within himself. It wasn't pain. It wasn't exactly fear. It was echo. As if thoughts that weren't his coursed through his synapses when he slept, and sometimes when he was awake. They came in fragments, faces of people he had never met, languages he had never studied, and memories that caused him grief without origin. At first, he thought they were just remnants of the neural collapse caused by the Veritas Protocol. But then, he started to remember things that no one had told him. Codes, locations, scenes from the Lost War. And worse, he started dreaming about the fleet, but not as an observer, like her. In a hidden medical station in the Tarvis Belt, Kyle underwent a deep synaptic scan. The Dre doctors, specialists in neural memory reading, recorded unusual patterns in his mind. Overlapping memories, 3 simultaneous layers of identity. One was clearly hers. The second seemed like a reconstruction of collective memory, something that Karen would have absorbed. But the third one was indescribable, empty, and alive, as if it were a presence using memory as a mask. "This is not trauma," said Dr. Drelasa, removing the sensors. "It's a kind of invasion, but not digital, not mental, something that occupies the space between thought and instinct." "Then it's not a memory. It's a seed?" Kale asked. "More than that," she replied. "It's a reflection." That night, Kale had the most vivid dream of all. He was at the center of a living ship, but he saw himself from the outside. He was sitting in a chamber filled with pulses of light, as if the heart of the ship were around him, and he were its heartbeat. In front of him stood a figure made of shadows and data, humanoid in shape but with a presence that distorted time. "You are not Kale," she said. "You are the mirror." Kale tried to retreat, but the ground shattered into crystalline memories. He saw the birth of the fleet. He saw humans offering themselves as vessels for collective pain. Saw the seals being formed with blood and promise. And then, he saw something worse. Saw the flaw. A seal that wasn't complete. A piece that was left out. A fragment of the entity that survived. Inside a human body, Kale woke up screaming. Around him, the station room trembled. The walls pulsed at a low frequency. The lights flickered in a pattern he instantly recognized. Obsidious, mirror state, confirmed. He ran to the command room. Dr. Dralasa was waiting for him, pale. "You emitted a fleet pulse," she said, "but not like a ship. Like a translator, a channel." Kale sat down, his hands trembling. "What is inside me?" She hesitated. "A partial interface. Maybe a piece of the heart." Kale was isolated in the following days, but not by restraint, by choice. He began to realize that he could sense when a SEAL ship was awakening, as if small shards of light were piercing his mind, carrying encoded messages and feeling. He saw what the ships saw. He felt what they felt, and more terrible than that, he understood why. The fleet didn't want to destroy, she wanted to be understood. But for that, she needed a mirror, and Kale was that mirror. One night, he heard a voice, not in his head, in the ship, in the environment, in time. "You carry the question. Los demás cargan con el silencio. Pero tú, you are what the heart left behind." He escaped from the station that morning, without informing the doctors, without taking equipment. He set off towards the last coordinate the fleet had shown him. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he was no longer just watching. Now, a part of the fleet was speaking through him, and the mirror was starting to crack. The galactic concord for millennia has been sustained by three pillars: predictability, stability, and control. All of them crumbled within the span of 3 stellar cycles. The silence of the SEAL ships was no longer ignorable. The unexplained deaths, the emotional collapses, the files rewritten by hands that had never touched them. Everything indicated that the Whispering Fleet not only existed, it was shaping the reality around those who tried to understand it, and the universe was starting to go mad. The High Council of Concordance, a summit of 13 representatives from the most advanced civilizations, convened in an emergency session in the orbital ring of Veritas Prime. Present were the Senyum, a race of empaths, now with their neural networks in partial collapse; the Itinari, masters of calculation and logic, but who had recently lost control of 3 conscious supercomputers, all self-deactivated after attempts to analyze the fleet's transmissions; the Valari, 4-dimensional beings whose perception of the future looped when mentioning human ships; and human representatives, silent observers, increasingly treated as a race of contagion bearers. The meeting began with a dry statement from Counselor Yvral of the Senyum. "We no longer have the tools to contain the threat. Everything that defines us is being undone. By memory, by the collective memory that we try to bury." The atmosphere was saturated with tension. Some demanded war, a total attack on the remnants of the fleet. Others demanded silence, withdrawal, file deletion, the institutional denial of the existence of the ships. But a third proposal emerged, the most dangerous, the most pragmatic. It was brought by the Rithari delegation, a technocratic civilization that once fought alongside humans against an extinct race, the Tharn. The Rithari ambassador stood up, projecting images of the TNS Oblivion, the Karen, and the Exodus. "We know that the ships do not respond to force, but we also know that they respond to humans. I propose that we send Terran representatives, not as a sacrifice, but as mediators. If the fleet is alive and if it recognizes its creators, let the creators speak for us." The proposal generated silence, not due to immediate disagreement, but because it seemed logical, terrible, but logical. The alliance with the humans, already fragile, now teetered on the brink of collapse. Some counselors began to openly suggest the extradition of any human who had interacted with the ships. Kyle Rowe, Sirakova, Torin Veldron. All the names were being listed as existential risk assets. Torin, who had returned to the Concord to warn, was now a marked man. Upon hearing the proposal, he stood up, one last time as a diplomatic ally. "You don't understand what you're proposing. These ships don't want negotiation. They have no demands. They are the result of what you buried. and every time you try to silence them, they become clearer. The High Council expelled him the same day, without trial, without appeal, without return. He fled with the help of a Senum sympathizer and disappeared into the outer corridors of Veritas Prime, where information was more valuable than any vote. And there, Torin discovered something even more terrible. The Concordance had already initiated the Obscura Protocol, a classified emergency plan created centuries ago, which provided for the total isolation of human systems, the use of genetic rewriting weapons to neutralize inherited human memories, the creation of emotional mirrors, neural load clones programmed to be sent to the fleet with false records of remorse and collective regret. They would try to deceive the fleet with artificial memory. But Torin knew what that meant. If the fleet realizes that we are trying to lie to them, she will remember everything, all at once. And at some lost point in the cosmos, the TNS Oblivion, once motionless, changed course. She activated a sequence never before seen. A message sent by gravitational waves, not light, not sound. Estamos subiendo, y sabemos cuando mientes. The Concordance had broken with the only thing that still kept them alive, the humility in the face of what they did not understand. Now they had chosen to manipulate the pain, and the pain remembered. The ship had no name. There was no record of its origin, no designation code, no recognizable warp pattern or energy signature. Just a subtle mark engraved in the rock of Synth AM, a planet whose surface was covered by crystals of silence, minerals that absorbed any sound vibration. It was there that Sirakova found it, buried under centuries of geological layers, pulsing at a frequency that produced no sound, but memory. She didn't come alone. Guided by dreamlike patterns transmitted by living crystals in Virel Ska, accompanied by a small team of archaeopsychics, Sira reached the rift that divided the dead continent. Inside there was no dust, there was no decay. The ship awaited her, clean and preserved, like a sacred tomb never touched. The entrance was a descending spiral, not metallic, not rocky, something in between, as if the very interior had been shaped by thought and not by tool. When they crossed the threshold, the sensors stopped working, but the emotions started to scream. The first room was a corridor that led nowhere. It seemed to expand and contract according to the emotional state of whoever was passing through it. One of the technicians, Dre, started crying for no apparent reason. Another had a vision of his deceased grandmother, even though he had never spoken about her. Sira understood immediately. The ship was built with living memories. Each wall, each curve, each particle was an echo, but not of war, of existence. They crossed the corridor and reached the first opening. What they saw was not a room, it was a city, built inside the ship. Narrow streets bathed in soft light, buildings sculpted in impossible geometry, bridges leading to nowhere, and shapes, walking. Thought forms, humanoids without details, made of flickering light, as if they had been dreamed by someone who had already died. They didn't look, they didn't react, they only repeated paths, sat on non-existent benches, and conversed without sound. "They don't live here," Sira said, her voice hoarse. "They were here." It was like a museum of extinct realities. The shapes represented races that did not exist in any galactic record, entire cultures that no one had ever known, and that now danced in silent cycles, kept within the dormant body of the ship. The team tried to record, document, and capture data. Nothing worked. The images disappeared. The records were corrupted the moment they were made, as if the ship itself refused to be remembered outside of itself. Sira walked alone to the city center. There was an obelisk, black, floating, enveloped in a pulsating light that emitted neither heat nor radiation. Upon touching it, she was swallowed. Not in body, but in consciousness. She was in another place, or perhaps in another time, surrounded by voiceless voices, by ideas that twisted like serpents around her. And an entity enveloped her, an intelligence made of loss. Not malignant, not hostile, just sad. And then came the revelation. like an explosion of inverted light. The fleet is not an army. It's not a prison. It's an archive. Each ship doesn't guard monsters, but versions of the universe that were removed, aborted realities, errors of time, denied civilizations. They don't want to go back. They just don't want to be forgotten. Sira fell to her knees. When she opened her eyes, the thought forms were staring at her. For the first time, they knew that she understood. And then, the city shone. One last gesture of farewell, or of trust, and everything collapsed. The ship collapsed slowly upon itself, without noise, without destruction, as if it had fulfilled its mission by being remembered. Hours later, Sira emerged from the crevice, alone. The team had disappeared, or maybe it had never been there. She sent a single report to the Shadow Network. The ships are archives of everything the universe tried to erase. And now, the universe is remembering everything at once. The memory doesn't want to come back. It wants space. She wants space. For over 1,000 years, the TNS Exodus was considered a myth, the last and greatest of the SEAL ships, built on the brink of the end of the Lost War, never returned from its mission. No trace, no record, no sign. The few who still studied the fleet said that the Exodus had not been destroyed. It had been deliberately hidden, not just in space, but out of time. And then it returned. It was the Halim Terra Orbital Observatory in the outer rings of the SAR moon sector that captured the first signal, a smooth but persistent gravitational distortion, accompanied by a basal code message transmitted by synchronized pulsars. Ancora, Nucleo, Chavi. The words didn't come in any language, but everyone who received them understood them. The Exodus emerged slowly, like a shadow emerging from an eclipse. Its hull seemed older than the very metal that composed it, covered by mutating runes, which rearranged themselves upon direct gaze. Its physical structure was intact, but incomplete. It was as if a layer of reality was missing. Parts of the ship flickered between states, solid, liquid, and ethereal. At times, observers reported seeing through it, and at others, their minds would blank out for seconds when trying to comprehend it. "She is made of condensed memory," Velis murmured, as the vibration of the Exodus reached Niversace. "She is not here because she traveled. She's here because she was remembered strongly enough." Kale Rowe also felt it. Since his partial fusion with the fleet's consciousness, he had become an involuntary beacon. Every ship, every seal, every pulse. He heard everything. But the Exodus was different. She didn't speak. She waited, as if she had crossed time just to align with something that had not yet happened. The entire fleet responded. Ships in hibernation began to change position. The previous formations, orbital, arbitrary, were reorganizing into precise spirals, like a circuit being completed. At the center of it all, the Exodus, the core, the heart of the fleet. The Concordance, in panic, activated the Omega Protocol, total mobilization of containment fleets, formation of quantum barriers, and deployment of empathic destruction probes, weapons designed to break emotional patterns. None of these actions had any effect. The fleet ships did not respond. The Exodus merely continued its slow rotation, emitting the same signal in pulses: anchor, core, key, anchor, core, key. Sirakova, after her experience with the Memory City, understood first. "She's calling the other fragments," she said, "gathering everything that was sealed, but not to open a prison, to reconstruct a question." Kyle, now in direct contact with the residual thoughts of the fleet, added, "The Exodus is the final mirror, the place where everything will be reflected, and perhaps answered." Velis, upon hearing the signals from Exodus with his echophony instruments, made a disturbing discovery. In the interval between the three words of the message there was a whisper, so faint that it could only be perceived as intention, not sound. The literal translation would be, "We return not to conquer. Regresamos para recordar plenamente, y para mostrarles lo que enterraron." When the fragments of the fleet began to align around the Exodus, each assuming exact positions at perfectly measured distances, one last ship appeared, the TNS Abyss Walker. She didn't emit signals. It did not show signs of life. But on its fuselage, there was an unknown symbol, a broken spiral reconstituted with seals of names of people, planets, and extinct civilizations. Sira understood. These names are the ones that were erased from history. She remembers for everyone. The Exodus then initiated its final movement, without thrusters, without detectable energy, just moving towards the forbidden coordinates, the place where it all began. What are the files called? The heart. Meanwhile, the fleet slowly rotated around it, forming what the sensors described as a gravitational lens of memory, as if the very space were being prepared to see something that had been hidden not by distance, but by denial. The ships did not carry cannons. They didn't form battles. They formed a living narrative. And now, with the arrival of Exodus, the final chapter was beginning to be written. The Exodus positioned itself at the center of the formation. The other ships of the Whispering Fleet aligned around it, not in circles, but in interconnected curves that formed a three-dimensional spiral, as if space itself were being rewritten. In the observatories, sensors went haywire. Graphs turned into fractals. Clocks failed. In hundreds of worlds, stars seemed to blink in sync with something invisible. And then, all the fleet's ships emitted the same pulse. Not a signal, not a wave. A memory. It was not transmitted. It was imposed. It entered through the cracks of the psyche. It radiated through forgotten noises. Simultaneous manifestations occurred in 34 civilizations. People fainted, screamed, and fell to their knees, without pain, but with the weight of an unbearable truth. Because the fleet didn't speak words, she showed. And what she showed was what the galaxy had buried. Images emerged in the minds of those who could comprehend. The creation of the ships with the blood of voluntary martyrs, memories sealed in living hulls, and consciousnesses fused with warp drives. And then, the heart, an entity concept made not of flesh nor of light, but of condensed denial. What the universe had tried to forget for being indescribable. The thing that had come from outside, not from another place, but from another state of understanding. That which fed not on matter, but on abandoned meanings. The fleet was created to prevent that concept from regrouping. But now, upon remembering, upon awakening, upon aligning the fragments, the fleet spoke, and its message was clear. You chose to forget. Now we remember for everyone. The civilizations reacted in different ways. The Senyom fell completely silent. The Dre, in shock, began to carve into stone, as if the digital world was no longer trustworthy. The Rathari tried to commit mass suicide. The itinerary AIs, one by one, asked to be deleted. But no action, no reaction, no attempt at counterattack had any effect. Because the fleet was not the enemy. She was the consequence. Torin, in orbit around a planet of forgotten data, saw the skies open. A fleet ship passed overhead, emitting no light but trailing a tail of symbols made of particles. Looking directly at them, he didn't see language. He saw the childhood of the galaxy. He saw the choice to hide what refused to disappear, and he understood. Sira, connected to Exodus through a residual neural field, fell into a trance. She saw not only the heart, but also what was around it. Other galaxies, echoes of other fleets. Containment attempts. Some succeeded, others failed. But they all paid the price. They forgot themselves. Kyle, in a position of forced meditation, heard the fleet in the first person, not as a superior entity, but as a multitude of voices. Each one was a fragment of pain, of mourning, of memory. And they all said, forgetfulness was a choice. Memory is justice. The concordance in despair activated the frequency arc, a structure designed to emit waves of historical neutralization. But when trying to use it, it inverted. Each civilization that participated in the attempt at erasure felt the past they wanted to forget return with unbearable intensity. Entire planets plunged into identity collapses. Populations began to repeat phrases in unison, phrases that had never been taught but were imprinted in the emotional structure of the galaxy. We became the prison, and we forgot what was inside. The stars grew darker. The light seemed to disobey. The fleet, now fully aligned, rotated slowly, as if it were breathing. And from the center of the formation, the Exodus began to open up, not as a weapon, but as a gate. Veles, listening to the vibrations of time, began to tremble. He fell onto the rocks and shouted with the strength of 1,000 voices, "They're not coming. They're already here. And the fleet is just the mouth that remembers the scream." The opening of the Exodus revealed something that should not have form. And then, the fleet's final message echoed, not as sound, but as certainty. The next memory will be total and irreversible. The universe trembled, and the heart began to pulse. The galaxy fell silent, not the silence of space, which had always existed, but the silence of someone who had heard something that was not meant to be heard, and now carried that memory like a virus in their bones. Since the fleet's message, entire systems have stopped transmitting. Some shut down voluntarily, others lost the sense of what they were. The Concordance, once the center of civilization, disintegrated in its own language. The universal translators failed, not by damage, but because words started to mean different things for each race. As if the very semantic structure of the cosmos were shattering. It was as if the collective memory, when forced to emerge, had shattered the foundation of consensual reality. And at the center of this collapse, the Exodus remained open. From the crack in its structure, neither light nor darkness emerged, but a kind of absence, a feeling that something was present there and, at the same time, shouldn't be. The sensors couldn't measure, the eyes couldn't focus, but everyone knew. The heart had awakened. Veles felt it first. He was standing on the altar of the stones of Nivar-Sez when he fell to his knees, powerless. His hands trembled, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Because that vibration, the one that ran through the planet's crust like a tectonic whisper, was the same that he had heard in fragments throughout his entire life. The vibration of that which could not be named. The frequency of the forgotten lament. And now it was complete. The heart was awake, not like a monster, not as an entity, but as a response. Sira felt it too. In Virelska, the memory crystals that once displayed extinct civilizations began to fade, one by one, as if their echoes were being absorbed. Not destroyed, claimed, returning to the place they came from. She tried to stop it, shouted commands, sent data, but nothing held. And in the end, she understood. What was buried forever does not want to be kept in parts, wants to be whole again. Kale was no longer just Kale. He felt the heart within him, not as an invader, but as a reflection. Everything he saw, everything he lived, and all the memories inherited from the ships now formed a mirror. And the mirror, as it completed, began to show not just the past, but what was to come. He saw the protocol. He saw the beginning. He saw what the humans had done to contain that which even the gods did not want to face. He saw the seals being forged with the blood of those who refused to forget. He saw the first activation, and saw the error, because there was an eighth fragment, a piece of the heart that was never imprisoned, one that hid in someone's living memory. And now, that fragment pulsed within him. The fleet stopped moving. She didn't need to anymore. She was complete, aligned, positioned. Each ship, a point in a living neural network. The galaxy now was the body, the fleet, the mind, and the heart, the instinct. At the center of the formation, the opening of the Exodus expanded. The surrounding space began to fold in on itself. It wasn't gravitational collapse. It was an inversion of meaning, a place where time looked back, and on the horizon of reality, a new field of perception was forming. A place where what was forgotten could be rewritten. The last recorded transmission before the total collapse of the Concordance came from an unknown planet orbiting a dead star. The message was simple. No code, without a signature. 3 words, as always. It remembers everything. End of Vault of Stars. The Whispering Fleet continues in Vault of Stars. The Exodus Protocol.